The following podcast episode contains discussion and analysis based on publicly available information and personal opinions. All content is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. The views expressed by the hosts are speculative and should not be interpreted as definitive conclusions. The hosts are not attorneys, and perspectives shared are that of ordinary citizens. Listeners are encouraged to conduct their own research.
Hey everyone, I'm your host Taylor Valley, and welcome to the Hawkeye Citizens Transparency Project, the podcast where we take a hard look at what's happening in our local government and ask the questions that nobody else is asking. Hawkeye shines a light on municipal government affairs right here in Hanahan, South Carolina, and across the greater Charleston region. Let's be honest, most normal people don't have time to sit through hours of city council meetings, but the decisions that are made there, they actually affect you, your money, your family, and your community. After all, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. Today, we are breaking down the February 11th, 2025 Hanahan City Council meeting, where a peculiar ordinance change raised some serious questions about transparency, power, and who's really making the decisions in this city. Joining me today is Mr. rewritten, a native of Hanahan and engaged citizen who's been following this issue closely. So the question is, why? Who benefits from this? And where was the public in this discussion? All right, let's get into it.
Hello, Taylor. How are you?
I'm doing great, Ray. How are you today?
I'm doing fine.
Appreciate you joining us.
Hey, glad to be here. So we're going to talk about the Hanahan City Council meeting that took place February the 11th. And the City Council made an attempt to modify an ordinance. So what the hell you think happened?
I mean, that's a great question, man. I would say a 30,000-foot view of what I saw is, imagine a governing body that had an ordinance, a law that existed for decades. And that law is about an office position in the city, not an elected position, but an appointed one. And, they want to go a different route now. And in their words, hire a firm instead of appointing this lawyer. Well, in my opinion, that's a legislative change. They cleverly announced this and called it a clarification. But if you ask me, it's not a clarification at all. It's an actual legislative change. And as well as I do, you do that in the open. You don't do it in the shadows.
That's right. So you're saying that the discussions about this should have taken place in an open session as opposed to a closed or executive?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. You don't need legal advice to say, we have a current ordinance in this city that says one thing and we want to change it to another thing. That's a legislative change, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, we also missed a great opportunity for the people in the council to voice their reasons and their opinions so that we could better evaluate those people and how they think and how they make decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually stunned, at the notion that they'd gone in there and at least theoretically, you're not supposed to do any vote counting in an executive session, let alone actually vote on things. But my takeaway was it seemed like this was all a done deal before there was any public discussion at all.
Yeah, it had looked like a predisposed or seemingly predisposed answer. And let me say, everybody on the council wasn't for this. There were 3 people pushing it. But they're changing a law. This is not a clarification. It's an outright change in the law. I'm reading right now off of a Municipal Association of South Carolina frequently asked questions. And one of the questions that says, can votes be taken in an executive session? And it specifically says that votes cannot be taken, nor can any type of informal polling be taken in executive sessions or closed meetings. So you think there was any evidence, Taylor, that there might have been some informal polling taking place in that executive session?
I mean, I don't want to speculate too much, but having the advantage of hindsight, we witnessed it live and then all had the opportunity to go back and take a look and say to ourselves, did I really hear that? We'll get into the specifics of what was said in that meeting, but it truly was shocking. So my takeaway is that there was certainly at least a comfort level leaving that executive session that this thing's going to sail right through. We're going to announce it, we're going to get a motion, we'll get a second, we're going to call for a vote. I mean, again, that's lawmaking.
Yes, lawmaking. So we get into a little bit more. about the particular lawmaking and the ordinance amendment, which is what they're doing. It's not a clarification, it's an amendment to an ordinance. So in your mind, what do you think the difference in this situation between having an office, which is the current ordinance, the way it has read for a very long time, and abandoning that office, or at least giving the council the ability to abandon the office and hire a for-profit firm, a law firm, to come in and fill that office for the government?
Right. Well, I mean, it's complex. So let's take it one step at a time. And your initial question was, is there a difference? And I mean, yeah, there was a difference, or we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. They wouldn't be changing anything, right? And I think that, so for a matter of fact, if you go back and read the transcripts from that meeting, the public portion, there was a discussion about loyalty, reducing the number of conflicts of interest with an in-house attorney. And Hanahan has a history of having a lawyer on staff, had it for many, many years. So one of the interesting points was in the agenda itself, the city acknowledged that they'd been doing it wrong for quite a few years. You can see that in the agenda. They've been using a firm knowing that the ordinance called for an appointed attorney. That's the whole point of the ordinance, going from an appointed office, if you will, an official position, an attorney, one person. And I want to make this clear. I mean, just because it's one person, that doesn't mean they can't go hire outside attorneys, right? There's so many specialties in the legal field. You have to have that ability. And that law did not prevent them from doing it. This attorney is representing the city, and if subject matters out of their wheelhouse, he can certainly go get another attorney. Nothing prohibits that, right?
Yeah. There's all the flexibility that's required is there with the appointed office of the attorney. They can hire attorney for whatever they need if there's a specialization issue. They both have consequences. Have you ever opened up a city web page and you can see where it says city attorney Mac McQuillan? Not the law firm, but the city attorney.
No, personally, I have not. No.
I've looked it up in the past few years. But it says clearly city attorney is Mac McQuillan. Now, that in and of itself maybe means something or not, but it certainly is confusing in that conversation. He's being deemed, or has been deemed for a long time, as the city attorney. Another conversation, it's the law firm and not the attorney. So, obviously that sounds a little shady.
Well, and I think the interesting thing is that, just given what you're describing, that model, they would have no problem describing that per the law. It's a very simple, straightforward thing. You have an appointed city attorney. That is the most common form of legal representation for municipalities across the state. So the question is, are we operating under McQuillan as our city attorney, or are we operating under the law firm that McQuillan is employed by? And that's a big difference. I mean, not just financially, we'll get into that, but also just from an ethical standpoint.
Yeah, that's right.
Just imagine this. Imagine you're writing a novel, but you come up with this really great ending for your novel, and then you write that ending first.
Well, stuck with the ending.
You got to write the whole story around it. You're stuck with that ending. And so they already know what the end game is here. The end game is that Mr. McQuillan stays on as the attorney, but they want to change the face of that.
Make your statements, make your arguments, because that's what you want, instead of going through the decision-making process.
So, and I would make this argument, and I think based on what we're describing today, the office of city attorney currently does not exist, but legally it exists until it doesn't. And it's up until this point, nothing's ever been done or even attempted to make it go away. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot. We'll unpack that some more. So for the people at home, if you have access to the actual video, scroll up to 2 hours and 3 minutes when new Councilman Crowley begins to speak of his concerns. He makes several comments, and I'm not going to try to quote those comments, but I'm going to try to characterize them. Number one, he said it was first and foremost the duty of the council to follow its laws.
Yeah.
Number two, he said that the design of the long-standing ordinance is to have the office of the attorney. And that way there would not be the conflicting interests that are going to be paramount when you've got a law firm. The third thing that he said of the ordinance modification is it would, by hiring a private firm, it would remove layers of protection, or at least a shield of protection. So there's protections that are not available with hiring a private firm, as opposed to the attorney being in the office. And my guess is that Tim Crowley has done some research. He's probably talked to some outside counsel about this, and I think he knows what he was talking about.
Well, yeah, first, I think anybody that's, followed this issue for any length of time or observed city government, I think you find it very refreshing to hear a new council member go up there and say in a public session, hey, we need to follow the law.
Let's follow the law.
Yeah. Right. And he's a new member. He's a fresh member, fresh set of eyes, right? Sometimes bringing in this fresh set of eyes, you start to see things that weren't there in the past. He's a very skilled guy, and he brought up good points. And that's the point of this, is so people can get a feel for what's actually going on in City Hall. I mean, that's the transparency aspect of an elected city council.
Yeah, and I'm sure people agree with me that I've got a lot of respect for the amount of courage it took for Tim to go against the people that he was clearly going against. And who knows, he probably was regretting going back into the executive session. They might take him behind the woodshed, right?
Right. Well, no, it's interesting you bring that up, Ray. I think, it's important. It's a phrase that, especially when I got into politics about 15 years ago, moral courage was a thing, right? Doing the right thing, even though there might be consequences professionally, personally, but you have the moral courage to do the right thing. And that's been lost in our politics in recent years. And I think, in my estimation, that's what Tim was trying to do in that meeting is have that moral courage.
No doubt about it.
Well, anyway, Councilman Crowley went on to say, an office of the attorney would be without bias under the current ordinance. The office of the attorney would also be paid hourly. So what's interesting about this whole thing is, you'll recall, Ray, there was a lot of talk about, that's going to be too much money. It's going to be so much more expensive. We can't do that. Every council member is sitting up on there got a packet prior to this meeting to look over. And one of those documents that was in there was what they're calling the engagement letter between the city administrator, Courtney Solar, and the law firm that's seeking to be hired. Not only were they charging an hourly rate, if we had to hire outside experts, you're going to have to pay them their rate, and the city's going to have to do that. So everything they did is a cost for the city. If you actually did cost analysis on hiring an entire firm versus having the city attorney, like the ordinance said, I mean, the appointed office there's no way it wouldn't be cheaper.
Well, a private law firm is motivated by making a profit. We did a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request recently, and it went back a little over a year, I think 15 months, maybe a little bit more. And just during that period of time, the law firm of Haynes, Sinkler, and Boyd had billed about $220,000 to the city of Hanahan. Wow. So I believe if you were to go back before the period of time when other lawyers were operating on behalf of the city, they didn't spend nearly that much money. And on top of that, we haven't received the information on Ross Appel and his law firm. And when we receive that, we estimate that's going to be another six figures number. And then they're also paying the Council of Governments to do this work, a lot of this work for them. So I believe that when it comes to mostly legal, but also just the whole legal plus third party, they're approaching $400,000 a year in spending right now. And I don't see any end in sight.
Right. I mean, you could get new AstroTurf on the football field.
Yeah, just a couple of years. What they could save in legal costs.
So, I mean, think about it this way. If you're a private family-owned business, right, or publicly held company, you often have board of directors, stakeholders that are not going to go along with squandering money. I mean, generally speaking, there's that fiduciary duty in a lot of those companies. But in this case, it's your money, as in the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to do this kind of stuff when it's not your money, when it's other people's money.
Yeah.
But I'd say this, if there is a way to hire a third-party auditor, think about it this way, a third-party auditor or a third-party company that comes in, does work for the city. I mean, you get it. If you handpick the auditor, you get the results you want.
Yeah. Yeah, that raises a bunch of other issues. We'll get to that maybe on another podcast. But like you said, we went into, if you look at that meeting as a novel, they already know what the ending looked like. So I think we're going to make more transparent that the means to get to that end definitely happen with aggression and enthusiasm.
I think that cost analysis we were talking about, I mean, that's what the citizens of Hanahan want to hear. And that's why we're doing the Hawkeye project, to bring to light, hey, this is how your taxpayer dollars are being spent. So when you run over that pothole or you see a service that's underfunded and then you say, where's all that money going? We're here to tell you where it's going.
Yeah, and I've heard them talk about, well, we get a discount, we get $50 discount or whatever that number is per hour. The question is really, it's not the dollar amount that the attorneys are charging per hour. The bottom line is they're just accumulating a massive amount of hours on a weekly, monthly, annual basis, and that's really where the problem is the amount of hours. If they were charging $100 an hour, it would still be too much money that we're spending right now based upon all those hours they're billing for.
Exactly. Well, and I think it's a good time for us to make a point of clarification here, we are not talking about, I have an office that's going away and we are hiring a law firm. This is built seemingly to hire this specific law firm.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, they're not just looking for any law firm. They had put out this request for proposals, an RFP, very standard government procedure, but they only put it out for, what was it, 14 days?
Yeah, that begs a lot of other questions. I mean, is 14 days enough time to really receive and evaluate a sufficient amount of proposals and to properly interview, negotiate with other companies?
Right.
Well, anyway, let's keep going. At this point in the meeting, Councilman Spurlock pointed out that he wanted to make sure that what was on the table that Councilman Crowley was talking about, the office itself.
Right.
He seemingly realized there was a diversionary tactic going on. And what we're talking about is the legislation, but we're really trying to understand and focus on what it was that Councilman Crowley was trying to focus on, which is abandonment of the office.
Right.
Are we better off by abandoning this office? Should we be eliminating this office? And frankly, is it even legal to eliminate that office? It's that simple. With a private sector job, you can outsource certain things to the private sector, like your garbage collection.
Yeah, it's a service.
But outsourcing an office, and then at this point, Councilman Sally starts talking. He avoids the discussion of the office designation. He doesn't want to recognize it. That's clear. Mayor Rainwater kind of doubles down on Sally's points, and then Councilman Hedgepath, who is also avoiding the situation. Unlike Crowley, Councilman Spurlock, they're not avoiding the situation of the office. But you can see that once these other councilmen and the mayor start talking, you can kind of see what their agenda is.
Well, you know what he's getting at too, right? And again, we're not lawyers, but we're readers and we're citizens of this city who care. And I think anybody can go into the South Carolina Code of Laws. You don't have to be a pastor to read a Bible, right? And so
That's right.
When you go into the South Carolina Code of Laws, you know, there's a great search engine tool on that website. Just go in there and put in the term dual office holding. You can go to the South Carolina Attorney General's webpage. It's a great site. And do the same thing. Type in dual office holding, and you will start to see Attorney General's opinions. And now, you know, we know Attorney General's opinions are not binding law, but it means somebody has asked the question, hey, is this dual office holding? And dual office holding, just to break this down so everybody's aware, it generally means that somebody who is in an elected position or appointed position with a government is in another elected or appointed position. So you're only allowed to have one of those, right? And there are some attorney general's opinions out there that say if you take on another one, you're automatically resigning from the one you were just in. So what it means is if you're an elected official and you just so happen to be an appointed attorney and you're elected and you're also acting as an attorney for another government entity, I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer. This is not me making a judgment here, but that sounds like multiple office holding.
And so it appears that the desperate reason for trying to change this ordinance is to accommodate a dual office holding scenario that exists right now within the attorney situation in Hanahan. And that raises a lot of concerns too.
Right. And, you know, none of this business of again, let's go back to where we started, this clarification. None of this came up until after the term dual office holding was brought up from the podium at a public city council meeting last year. And then all of a sudden, you know, we got to change the ordinance.
Yeah.
It could be a coincidence.
Yeah, that's true.
But to me, if you've got any kind of investigative mind at all, you're going to look at this and you really got to think.
Yeah. So, you know, when it came to light, there was a movement. They actually tried to do this thing last year, only 6 months ago or so, and it got voted down. Here they are coming back again, not willing to give up.
Exactly. Well, I mean, you could do a whole podcast just on nothing but dual office holding alone, just by, you know, reading some of those attorney general's opinions. They're pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and it's in the state constitution. It bars, like you said, dual office holding, and once a person takes on another office, they automatically have resigned from the office they're in. And this is a problem that they're trying to band-aid at the expense of the Hanahan public and the investment community. So then going on through the meeting, Attorney McQuillan with the law firm of Hayesworth, Sinclair and Boyd, he steps up to the podium to address Councilman Spurlock's concerns. and he read something off of a case law. I think he said something like, it doesn't sound like this is multiple office holding. And then another attorney that was in the room, he came up and began to speak. And though neither of them were invited to come up and speak, Attorney McQuillan was allowed to speak. And of course, the other attorney, his last name is LeCurie, he was definitely going to disband that argument. So is it illegal? Have we done something wrong? Is anybody done anything wrong? That's kind of the sentiment that started coming out about this point of the meeting. Who's done anything wrong? And I think Councilman Spurlock they were trying to figure out or try to get some answers. Yeah. And there was a perfect opportunity right there for there to be an open discussion about this.
Exactly.
But it got shut down.
Well, it's wild because let's be clear, this isn't dual office holding. This is not some sort of mystery, right? It actually exists. There's state statute. There's attorney general's opinions. The only thing we're trying to determine is that does this specific case, this specific instance in Hanahan, meet the definition of dual office holdings? You can cherry pick anything you want to make your case, but conversely, had the other attorney, LeQuery, like you were saying, actually had a chance to talk, he may have read directly from something that was contradictory to that. So, it was spot on, it was on point. And to me, this is textbook dual office holding.
Right.
But that's the problem with these city council meetings, right? It's all one-sided. And it's why we do this podcast, right, Ray? I mean, because it's all one-sided. They can spell anything they want, and nobody gets a chance to respond. So you could be sitting on a time bomb of information there going, but wait a minute, but you don't get a chance to respond to that, right?
Yeah, at this point in the meeting, Mayor Rainwater allows that the executive session attorney talk publicly. We kind of went over that just a second ago. And again, I think the point is that the other attorney wasn't allowed, knowing that attorney was going to probably debate the point that was made. And so then the question is, why such a vigorous effort to amend the ordinance if we're not trying to solve some problem? They're trying to write the model. And, about at some point, maybe a little later, Councilmember Shea, who's a new council member, started talking about, well, if this law firm has been representing the city of Hanahan for so many years, why do we have this problem? What's going on? So if these guys have been here so long, why are we in this situation? Why are we talking about this now? And somebody brought it up, put the flashlight where the darkness is. Now it's on the table. So let's just change the ordinance. And then Councilmember Shea said at some point, she talked about that people on the planning commission are actually fearful of consequences.
Yeah.
And this is just not normal business. It's not the way a normal government should operate.
Well, wait, Councilmember Shea, that's an anecdote. It's not a theory, right?
Yeah.
Like if you recall, this actually happened. Previously the planning commission actually had a lawsuit filed against them by a Hanahan City staffer, the planning guy, right? The staffer. This isn't an appointed commissioner. This isn't a city council effort, but a guy that gets paid 40 hours a week to go to work. So what do you think? Who do you think his lawyer was, right? Yeah, I know who his lawyer was, and you do too.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they should rightfully fear it because this actually happened. So now when the public jumped in on it and said, are you kidding me? Who's paying for that lawsuit? The city has filed against their own commission. So obviously the planning commission is going to need a lawyer to defend themselves. The city's going to need a lawyer to make that suit. And so who's paying for all that? Well, it's the same pot of money that they get for everything else. It's the taxpayers who are paying for those lawsuits.
It appears that they're doing whatever they need to do at whatever cost to maintain and retain this attorney. Is that really? Is it the most important thing to have this particular attorney, this particular law firm, or is it time for a change?
Well, and back to the novel, right? There's a lot of different prongs to it, right? But I think that certainly the end state is what you said.
Yeah.
I think the end state, we're going to retain the guys that have been loyal to us and made a lot of money from us. In the mayor's words, not mine, kept us out of trouble.
Yep. They're trying to get ahead. But it seems like more of a desperate reaction to a lot of questions that need to be answered. For example, who even hired McQuillan? Who even hired the law firm? Was it done properly? Was it done by the city council? Was it done by a vote? When was it done? How long has this individual been being paid all this money for all of this time.
Right.
And what is the real track record?
Well, I mean, if there was a proper form available to citizens and taxpayers, outside of this type of podcast, Ray, I mean, we could ask those questions.
More transparency.
Right.
More
So, I mean, my question is, why was the RFP only for 14 days? How many people actually sent in a response to it? How many firms were offered a gig or actually considered for the gig? The public has the right to know this stuff, and the public should be able to go into the city council meeting or go into City Hall and ask these things without being told that they have to go file a Freedom of Information Act request on the website. You should be able to walk up to the podium in those city council meetings and get answers, and that is not what happens.
Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be a secret. This is not national security. We're just talking about an attorney for a relatively small municipality in South Carolina. That's all it is. So getting back to the timeline, at 2 hours and 18 minutes, Councilman Crowley says Mayor Rainwater, and he immediately got shut down. And she told her new council member that he had to sort of wait till the end of the party to talk.
She said like a regular citizen, if I recall.
I don't know if she said that, but certainly was the treatment that was being displayed. But I'm not an attorney. You're not an attorney. But I think it's unfortunate that a council member, especially new, would be treated that way in broad public. Yeah. So going on to 2 hours and 21 minutes, Mayor Rainwater starts talking about an investigative committee. So here we go. Now we got the investigative committee. Sure, we're going to have an investigative committee. And I think they did a motion.
Yes.
And then they said, okay, there's going to be an investigative committee on some things that have been brought to our attention.
Things, right.
They're talking, what are they talking about? Who won the Super Bowl?
I think.
What does things mean?
Right. I mean, it's incredibly broad. And I think when you use the term things that have come to our attention, who's our? Is it an asteroid coming to hit the Earth in 3 weeks? What are things? I mean, I sure don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like somebody wants to give another law firm a blank check.
Right.
They said they're going to hire a law firm to oversee it. So,
well, then things is a good word for it.
Yeah. Councilman Hedgepeth then did a motion, South Carolina law. I make the motion to appoint Mayor Rainwater, Councilman Adam Spurlock, and myself to conduct an investigation of the affairs of the city and approve that the city retain, here we go, legal counsel to issue subpoenas. Whoa, that sounds like a threat for anybody working for the city. Here it comes. We're going to start subpoenaing our own now.
Right.
Councilman Crowley and Shea ultimately voted no. What do you think of all that?
Oh, I mean, it seems like it can't get worse for them, and then it does. There's certainly an ordinance in the municipal codes that provide for special committees. I'm not sure that's what this is. But yeah, it sounds like another overreaction, another overreach.
Yeah, it sounds like a desperate attempt to me. I've learned a little bit about this, and I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that, number one, a city council cannot investigate its own members.
Sure.
It can investigate certain things within the departments of the city, but it cannot investigate its own members. Second thing about this type of investigation, it could very well become a weaponization, using the government as a weapon. So whether, what's going on in these secret executive sessions, we don't want to eliminate the office of the attorney, those are the kind of things that several people on the council were really trying to get answers to. So instead of telling everybody, be quiet, we're going to push this through, we made our mind up and we're going to come out here and we're going to vote. And when we're done, y'all going home.
Well, I mean, first of all, was this properly posted to go into executive session and talk about this? I mean, that was one of my first questions. So you'll recall at that meeting, it seemed to me, the motion about the investigative committee, it came up out of nowhere. That was like an afterthought, right? But obviously it was probably talked about in an executive session.
Mm-hmm. It comes across to me, as far as I'm concerned, just another reaction and then another and another, and dangerously a weapon that could potentially scare people,
right?
Even its own council or other people that work within the city of Hanahan.
Let's talk about these subpoenas. And I've heard this from folks, who volunteer in these positions, but I mean, these are volunteer commissioners and volunteer boards that people get into because they want to serve the public. This is not, again, a matter of national security. And now you are talking about having these folks possibly get subpoenaed. Well, I mean, I think you have to narrowly craft subpoenas. That's my understanding of them. So when you start talking about subpoenaing council members, staff, these volunteers on these boards, it seems to me like you'd have to tailor them pretty narrowly to the purpose. So if I'm on this investigative committee,
Can I go to a councilman and say, here's a subpoena, I want to see your phone, we're going to do forensic analysis on it? Is that councilman compelled to hand their phone over right then and there? What is the, I mean, come on.
Yeah, and let's go spend some more money on attorneys. Here's another excuse to hire another attorney. So that's just sad to see this.
And if there is another lawyer, who's that person going to be? And I don't know, because I think it seemed to me that the mayor and council members Hedgepeth, Councilman Sally, made a pretty big deal out of telling us how important it was to hire a firm because they got the experts, right? They got the experts in anything and everything. So we won't have to go get another lawyer, because we're with this firm. Well, so what about this? Are we going to have to go get a lawyer who's outside of that firm because that firm is at the center of this? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, in all likelihood, it's going to be a friend of McQuillan's who already know they don't want to hear information from an attorney that is going to attempt to dismantle or disagree with anything in the context of whatever his advice is. And I know that for a fact he was chomping at his bits to get up there and have a conversation at the meeting.
Yeah.
Then there was, and then he was taken down. I guess we're talking about Crowley taken down by rainwater, not allowed to speak, not allowed to address. The question that Councilman Spurlock wanted to know about the dual office holdings, that could have been deliberated right there, but the other attorney wasn't allowed to talk. But what is allowed is for this city attorney McQuillan to walk up there and talk anytime he wants to. And who knows what they're talking about back there in those executive sessions.
Oh, yeah.
Why are we allowing them to go into these executive sessions? The very attorneys who were respondents to the RFP go back there.
Well, we haven't covered
sales pitch.
You're right. We haven't covered and that's a great word for it, is a sales pitch, because there is money involved in this, and it is a sales pitch for a contract. But we haven't covered this yet for the folks at home. But I think that this is very important to note as well in the web of all of this. The folks that are giving legal advice, these lawyers, giving legal advice in executive session on who these people should hire as their attorneys, are the same ones that responded to the RFP. So imagine that for a second. All right. These guys that work for the firm, the city administrator and the council already know that they put in an application for that contract. And and allegedly you're already doing it without a contract, but they've signed this letter of engagement. So again, for the folks at home, they're giving legal advice from the guys that they're trying to get a change in the ordinance so that they can make this move. And there's money involved in that, right? We know that they attempted it. We know they took a vote on it. It carried, the motion carried. But correct me if I'm wrong, there is a pending lawsuit here to actually see if that vote was legitimate in the way that it was conducted, correct?
Yeah, there is. And by the way, that letter was a recent letter, so who knows what documentation. We've done a FOIA request to try to find out how this law firm got hired, or if they ever really technically got hired.
True.
So, you got this law firm sitting there, or these law firms sitting in executive sessions dealing with what should be questions that need to be asked and that should be asked out in the open. But, apparently they have a guard or guardians that keep them from getting exposed. Councilmember Shea, she said something about, well, again, y'all been our law firm for how long? I think Mayor Rainwater said
20 years.
So for all this time you've been a law firm, and here we are in this quagmire. And of course they don't want, when I say the certain people on council don't want this to seem like it's a problem, okay, or that it has been a problem, or more importantly, how many more problems can result from the past activities and covering them up the way that they're doing.
Right. They don't want to face those questions.
Yeah. Right. So by the way, most of these questions, when they come up from people like Crowley or Spurlock or Shea, it didn't seem like anybody else on the council was even wanting to talk about any of it.
I mean, when you keep hearing these things, right, you don't have to be, we keep saying we're not lawyers. We are not lawyers, but you don't have to be to say, man, something doesn't smell right here, right?
Yeah.
And if this is allowed to continue, I mean, can't you see, where does this stop, right? I mean, this is one of those, and we look at that in government all the time, but this is one of those situations where it can spiral out of control, truly.
Yeah, there's a lot of downside to this. They've been receiving legal advice openly and closed, and from letters, that some of the letters we haven't seen, and it's just not sustainable. Well, they're on the pace of spending $40,000 to $50,000 a month for damn lawyers,
in a town our size, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think I want to go back here and focus on this meeting that occurred on February 11th. We left off talking about how newly elected Councilman Tim Crowley actually not being allowed to speak anymore, and he had to wait until the end, right, to actually be able to speak. Councilmember Crowley brought to their attention that there is an active, and he said, investigation going on involving some complaints about this law firm. This was one of the most interesting parts of the meeting to me. It was interesting that the mayor asked if there was any further comment, and Councilman Crowley just said, well, there's some matters that are being investigated. And the mayor said, by who? And she repeats it, by who?
Like she didn't know.
Like she didn't know. And so then Councilmember Sally jumps in. He says, well, I haven't seen a list of allegations. And Councilmember Crowley replies, the allegations against Mac McQuillan and his law firm that you, Mayor Rainwater, provided to us. It was a shock. I've never seen anything like this before. And so Councilmember Sally, going along with this, right, says, I don't know what you're talking about. You're saying there's allegations. I haven't heard of any allegations. Again, I'm paraphrasing here, but generally speaking, just a straight denial. Councilmember Crowley says there's a list of allegations. There's a list of complaints that has been sent to the city council. Right? Yeah. You haven't seen that? You haven't seen that, right? Councilmember Sally says, jar my memory. I've never seen such a display of playing dumb like this. Jar my memory. So Tim Crowley does jar his memory. He says, you gave them to us, right? It's just incredible. So the mayor says, as a question, I gave that to you. It keeps going. Like at this point, the lack of shame in this. Well, she says, I gave that to you. And Tim says, well, yeah, the packet you sent us had the complaints. And here's where this diversion tactic really takes off. Oh, you mean the list of complaints provided by Ray Wren? Well, you're Ray Wren. So what do you think about that?
Well, it's mind blowing. Apparently, Mayor Rainwater sent out a letter or documentation that they've read. And it's not, Ray Wren's not investigating anybody. This investigation is being conducted by the Office of Disciplinary Counsel.
Right.
They don't investigate if there's not a reason to investigate. And they sat there in that meeting. We've got a situation now where two council members are not, or the mayor and another council member, not want to talk about this. And they're sitting there swimming with the sharks, and they continue on with the diversion.
Right.
And I think this is the first time that the public probably became aware of the investigation that is going on.
Well, and I think it's very interesting. It's almost like you could have written a script that the mayor and Councilmember Sally and Councilmember Hedgepeth, to a degree, were working off of, just to say, we had no knowledge of this. But when Councilmember Crowley goes, no, it's in the packet that you sent out to us, the tone changed quickly. And I'm sure you noticed that in the video. It became, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that is a thing. But are people guilty without an investigation? Aren't they innocent or even guilty? That's sort of acknowledging, like, yeah, okay, we do know about it, right? So that entire first part of the script is just out the window. They do know about it. So they got to divert. So Councilmember Crowley does what any good, trusted elected official representing his city would do. And he posed it as a question. Hey, there's an investigation going on. We've got stakeholders and our residents, our investors, our business community. This community, when we say that, is everybody and anybody who's considered a stakeholder in the affairs of the city of Hanahan. We have a right to be concerned about this. Why can't we, at least in the interim, just go back to the way we've been doing it for decades and have an appointed office for the attorney until this investigation, which now we know is a fact, that's confirmed, right? Why don't we wait until that concludes? And then, of course, Councilmember Hedgepeth goes into real defense mode here. And immediately after making the comment about being innocent until proven guilty, guess what he wants to do? He wants to go back into executive session.
Secret meeting time. So here we go. He made a comment right about here that Appel, not McQuillan, but Appel is not the city's attorney. Why don't we just tell the truth here?
Right.
I remember Councilman Shea stated, you've got people in the city that are scared. And I think it's coming to light, the type of tactics that they're scared of.
And you brought up a great point here. So it was Councilmember Shea, following when Kevin Hedgepeth shut down, that said that the Planning Commission was fearful. This is an important point. We only spoke about this a little bit, but I want to go back to this. She asked, who is representing the Planning Commission? Is it the same attorney? And then she said, is Ross Appel coming back to the city? To which Hedgepeth says, Appel is not the city attorney. So, what do you think that means? Is he not representing the city? Listen, you can parse words here. You can quibble out phrases, all of that stuff. But I think what Councilmember Shea is getting at is basically saying, what is Attorney Appel's relationship to the city?
That's right.
And that's a fair question. So why did she get so much pushback?
And I think she was trying to get to a point.
Right.
It's very difficult for discussions to take place when you've got that trifecta of senior city leaders up there trying to command and dictate what's going on. Quality discussions, the type of things that need to be discussed in open meetings. Hedgepath then said, this is the contract matter. This is the contract
So executive
matter.
session. Right.
Time for the executive session. Let's go.
Right. Well,
So, yeah.
let me ask you this. It's my understanding that if something is an agenda item that's published prior to a city council meeting, the ordinance change was an agenda item, correct?
Yep.
So residents are allowed to go to the podium and talk about anything that's on the agenda, correct?
Yep.
They specifically separate them agenda items and non-agenda items. So if a citizen could have gone to the podium and asked these questions, why can't Councilman Crowley ask it? He's a citizen too. As he was reminded, he is a citizen too. Why is he not allowed to ask those questions?
Yeah. The amount of courtesy and respect that should have been afforded from an ethical and moral standpoint should have been far greater than was provided to Councilman Crowley. If I were in his shoes, I would probably going, what in the world have I got myself into? Is this a normal government or is this a
He just got
dysfunctional
sworn
government?
in, right?
Yeah. He's got his life to live. He's trying to do the right thing, and he's looking out for the best interests of the people. The people are in the room, the people that are not in the room. And he's probably wondering, should I be scared?
Right.
Why am I being treated this way for just saying what I believe in a public meeting?
Yeah. And you see this so much in government, right? People get steamrolled. They come in, they try to do the right thing. They get steamrolled by special interest and then tuck their tail and move on, right? And I understand that. But, so at this point, Councilmember Hedgepeth says, oh no, Appel is not the city attorney. So again, Shay says, who hired him? This was interesting. So the mayor jumps in at this point and says, we did. City council did. So Rainwater goes on to say that he normally represents developers, but let's dissect that for a second, because Hedgepeth just emphatically stated that Appel is not the city attorney. So this does not make sense. The mayor is saying the city council hired Ross Appel, but Hedgepeth said we didn't. So what do you make of that, Ray? How do you get that contradictory?
I think this is what happens when factions of a government pretend to run the government secretly. I think that you leave a trail of suspicious activity.
That's right.
Ambiguous activity. What about the conflicts of interest? The Planning Commission is an entity.
Right.
Just to take that example, the Planning Commission was being sued by, who knows, the city, or was it Lee Lawson, the staff? Who knows? But anyway, and we've got multiple offices situation that's questionable within the Constitution of the state of South Carolina.
Right.
It's mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling.
Absolutely. Well, and they also seem to be very indignant when we talk about anything related to public records, Freedom of Information Act requests, things like that.
Yep.
So why would anybody have any issues with a resident, an investor, a business owner who lives or does business in this city requesting that type of information through FOIA? I mean, for instance, they want to hire a firm that Mr. McQuillan is already a member of. He's in that firm. So what if, I'm just asking here, what if they did other kinds of work for the city? What if they did work on land that the city was selling or doing work on land that the city purchased? Is that not also a conflict there?
Well, think about it. The law firms are profiting now from the Planning Commission, and they're profiting from representing the city. And it looks to me like a runaway train. So one of the things that I'll mention too is that we have done some Freedom of Information Act or FOIA requests.
Right.
Well, guess who's handling the FOIA requests for the city? They're outsourcing the FOIA requests, and they're being handled by
The same firm.
the same firm. Yeah.
That's just incredible.
Yep. So they're handling the FOIA requests. And so I don't want to make any accusations here, but you sort of got the fox watching the hen house here, and so here we're responding to documents that have to do with invoices that we've created, letters that we've written, notes that have been taken, emails, and we're going to go through those documents and take a black
They get the
magic
final
marker,
say.
and we're going to tell you how much it's going to cost. We did a FOIA request a while back, and they wanted $60-something thousand
Incredible.
for the information that we requested.
Right.
So they're also getting paid to represent the Board of Zoning Appeals,
Right.
which, by the way, both the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Planning Commission chairpersons, neither of them are comfortable right now with this firm representing those entities.
I mean, not to mention, you're talking over $1 million a year, probably. on legal fees at this point.
Well, I mean, I think I think that the pace that we're going, that's where it's going to.
Well, so if I'm hearing you correctly, and I'm not talking about just this particular lawyer or even the city of Hanahan, let's just make up a fake town and think of it that way. But what if a lawyer represents 4 or 5 different municipalities in the same region, the same lawyer, and their firm is getting a piece of 5 different municipal workloads because of that lawyer?
Yeah.
It looks pretty good for that guy, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's what's happening. There were city attorney for this city, city attorney for this city, city attorney for that city. I can name several of them. Kiowa, Arundel. I've got a list written down over here somewhere.
There's litigation in the Kiowa case, right?
Just take going to one meeting. I mean, you sit there, you got 2 lawyers in a meeting. You pay them for driving over, presumably. You pay them for preparing for the meeting, whatever they had to do to prepare, whatever statements. I mean, my guess is that McQuillan wrote the clarification memo that Courtney Solar read before the meeting. And, it's just, they've got a very loyal following of a few people here. And, I'm not sure I understand why.
I mean, you were talking, it is an absolute profit machine though, right?
Yeah, it is.
So, I mean, who's doing this, right? Who's actually running the city of Hanahan for a profit, right?
Well,
and I think
it looks to me like so much of the interactions that so many people have, you can just see the fingerprint of this law firm in every aspect of the city. And I think that's by design.
Well, it's interesting. And certainly, I mean, as elected officials, you think that they would have concerns over legal fees that are this high for a city of our size. And in that same meeting, they were doing a budgetary report, and they talked about how they were $30,000 over budget for legal fees.
And they probably over budgeted the amount anyway.
Because they knew it was going up, right? So I don't think that the citizens of Hanahan, the residents of Berkeley County, the taxpayers that fund these governments want this stuff to be happening. That's my take, Ray. And I really appreciate your time today and coming on. We are going to continue this series as we move forward, reacting to all the things that are coming out of City Hall, whether that's the future City Council meetings, Planning Commission meetings, things like that. But we are here to shine a light on what's going on, and just really appreciate your time and your thoughts today, Ray. So check back in with us soon. And Ray, we hope to have you back someday soon.
All right. Great time.
All right. Thank you, sir.